Welcome to Fast Pace, the new growth, leadership and management podcast featuring Josh Phegan and Dean Mackie. We wanted to peel back the layers on what happens in the world of fast-paced real estate agencies, from new leadership models to the management challenges we all face each day. This is about a new era in the estate agency sector. Rapid changes to business models, service lines, remuneration and growth present the greatest opportunities that we've ever seen. Sit back, get inspired, grow your skills and reimagine what's possible with Fast Pace. Every Friday, wherever you get your podcasts, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Josh Phegan Digital. Dean, one of the most valuable assets sitting inside of any business, without a doubt, is the quality of that data. And we're going to talk today about the data play. And I'm a big believer that a competitive advantage is only a competitive advantage if it's actually used. And often when I walk into a business, I see huge amounts of data and lots of opportunity and a ton of relationships that kind of left behind, and we're ultimately playing the game as though we're a brand new firm, even though we're not actually using all the data that we've actually got. Dean, you're really big on data and probably one of the best minds I've actually seen in this space. What are your thoughts about data, its value inside an organisation, and how we can actually really extract the most out of it inside of any business?
Thank you, Josh. Look, I think that data on its own is just data, right? I mean, I think most businesses are still operating and it's I am categorising, but a lot of people still running in silos. Individual silos where the data doesn't actually really talk. You might have technology that talks to each other, but the data doesn't. And so data on its own doesn't mean anything. I think that the industry is still sort of caught a little bit.
And whose data is it?
Yeah, all that. Well, look, I think that in our industry, a lot of people don't realise. I mean, you're getting a lot of first-party consent data, right?
Yeah.
And when you do that, that's extremely powerful. I don't think people realise, our agents in particular, and our industry doesn't realise how valuable first-party data really is, and that we are at the coalface of getting first-party consent, and that's the best information and the best data you can actually gather, and it's also the most valuable, right? But it's only valuable if you can actually take that information, that data. So let's just say data is just data. But data can become information, right? So if you can sort of collect it and then store it and then manage it, it's then going, right, how do you then turn that not just into information, but to use it into, let's call it wisdom if you want to call it that, but stuff you can do stuff with. So for example, if you collect it, store it, manage it, and then you're using it, you can go, I'm going to make informed decisions about, let's say I'm going to develop a new product. That might be good for the customer, or I might be able to give an agent a call list with some really good quality leads on it, right? That's actually taking that information and turning it into usable wisdom, if you want to call it that. So the first party data includes things like every single email, anything that comes through to a website, interactions on social media, open home data, someone engaged with a newsletter. There's so many elements of where we're capturing all this information, right? But it's where does that information end up, and then how do you use it to get to create what they call an audience.
Yeah.
So understanding for you, Josh, or for a business or an agent, what is the audience, and then what is that audience looking for, and how do you personalize then the contact, the content, the communication with that audience to generate an opportunity, right? So
learning how to be relevant to it, right?
100%, right? So it's almost like it goes into this big sales funnel, and then if you've got the appropriate infrastructure, and we've gone out and invested in an engine room, if you want to call it that actually then connects all the dots on what all that information is doing, and it starts to understand the digital profile and therefore where they're up to in terms of a buying stage or listing a property.
Digital intent and
digital intent, exactly.
Real world activities and then digital activities, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you combine those two, and then you can overlay with third-party information around what the customer's doing, if they're going out and doing renovations or looking for finance or whatever they're doing. So that all goes into a place, and it sort of creates a place where you can assess and understand what that customer's doing. So then I'm just saying real-time dynamic content to you to say, well, what else is it that what resonates with you? Because based upon then your behaviour, we know how to serve you. So so it's a bit like, if you're on in Netflix, and I jumped on last night and I noticed that the algorithm gave me a whole bunch of suggestions on things that they think I would like, right? Now that's
Pablo Escobar.
No, it wasn't actually. It was a whole bunch of cooking and travel shows, funny enough.
Yeah.
Just happens to be what I'm doing at the moment. So that's my point, right? So
right information. So relevancy will drive the frequency of communication.
100%. Now that's different because that's a science-based business. If you go to Netflix, right? Netflix is a science-based business because it just interacts with me directly, digitally, and it builds an algorithm, a profile on me, and then starts giving me stuff. The same thing for my Iconic buying shoes. I've talked about that before. There's a whole bunch of examples where you can go that digital experience is 100% science-based. Now, the challenge is, even if in our industry you go and create, and I want to come back to this science-based thing in a moment, because we can have all the science in there that collects the data and then manages it and then uses it and says, okay, how are we going to give a contextual experience for the customer? The customer's going, yes, I like this because it's relevant to me. But we're not actually in a science-based business here in real estate, right? We're in a people-based business. And so what I've learned, and I'm still learning and I'm still working through, is that in a people-based business, you can have the best data strategy. You can invest millions of dollars into an engine room. You can build all the algorithms. You can get all the first-party data to talk. You can get overlay that with third-party data, and you can get all this great stuff, right? And you can get into a pretty sort of sexy point at which the data becomes super useful and super relevant, and you can actually do something with it, right? So we're sort of at that point, and that's wonderful. But if you haven't got your team, my lesson is you're coming back to your thing, is the data play is useful, not useful unless it's implemented correctly. You can understand and segment your data out, and you can do all those wonderful things, but unless you've got a team or a culture that values data and how to use that data, that's fully integrated and active and real time and all those things, then you're not actually getting cut through. Because you still need your team, right, to understand how that works. And I think that for a lot of people, it's still. I think with the advent of ChatGPT and the whole AI revolution we're going through, I'm starting to see the penny drop for some people, but they're still not understanding how it all fits together and how, based upon what they do, what information they put in, what happens when they do certain things. Like, if you've got a QR code on a brochure, and a buyer QR codes that, because now everyone's using QR codes, right? And they go, where do they go through to, right?
Land somewhere, right?
They need to land somewhere, but in most people's environments, that doesn't happen. It goes sort of nowhere. It might land somewhere, or it might go to a property website or whatever. But then what happens to that information? So
how does that go back into the database? Change the behavior around that particular person and pull that into a call list or a funnel or a conversation.
Well, what typically happens if you've got it set up correctly, you actually attach a code to the consumer, and then you follow them around, and then you're collecting more information on that consumer, and then based upon whether they're coming in or out of your environment, as well as all the external environments, you're actually now getting a really good profile on that person just from that one interaction, right? So
that improves their score on like a recency, frequency, 100%. Monetization
starts to move for the sales funnel, right? And then when it lands on an agent's call list, to your point, which it does in our case, the agent doesn't understand that that's a highly qualified lead, and they should call that person. If we call that person within a certain time frame, you're going to increase the accuracy of getting a result, right? But again, I'm still finding that the digital transformation of our people is where a lot of effort goes in. So I think my suggestion is that to say, if you're going to go and invest money in data strategy and really get your teeth into it, and it will cost you a significant amount of time and money and expertise, you've really got to make sure your team are on the journey and they understand exactly what the impact of what they do and don't do has on all of those things.
So Dean, I find myself in some weird situations where I find an insight and I think, we should go and do something with that, and we try it with one or two of our key clients and it's wildly successful. So as an example, I went through an open for inspection recently in my local area, and when I got there, the agent looked at me and she goes, I'm like, what? She goes, I should have called you about this one, shouldn't I? And I'm like, yeah. And I've got the 3 better, and she currently had on the market the 4 better. And it's a great example, right? So I thought, okay, I'm going to turn that into a system. We call it 40-40. Now, whenever we list a property, who are the 20 market appraisals that we've done that are 3 betters? And what are the 20 market appraisals that we've done that are 4 betters? We ring Dean and say, hey, mate, you've got a 4 better. We've just listed a 4 better. It's going to market. When it sells, I'm going to ring you in 4 weeks' time and see where you're at and have a conversation with you about that. Naturally, then we ring all the people with the 3 betters and we say, hey, we've got a 4 better that's coming. You should come and have a look at that. If they make the decision to buy, then all of a sudden that means they've got to rush their 3 better to market. Then when it sells, we ring the 20 people who've got 4 betters and say, hey, it's now sold. We've got 2 buyers left over. What should we do with them? And also, 2, we ring all the 3 betters, let them know about the sale price of the 4 better so they can be more confident about their changeover costs. Now, that data is a really important conversation. How do you actually now go and see when we actually made that call, then what actually happens with those people? Do they come to the open? Do they start the conversation? Do they scan the QR code? Did they go past the signboard? And that's what you're saying about the digital tracking, that's actually now going to go and push that higher. But if you get that insight, it changes. But Dean, I've got to go all the way back to the beginning, that I also went to an auction in my local area recently, and no one tried to take any names and numbers in the open house 30 minutes prior to the auction. Now, to me, that's where all the neighbours come through, right?
But again, Josh, that's my point. I think it's because of lack of understanding as to how it fits together. We've partnered with a company called Rowdy Fox, and they're actually providing industry services. And the thing I love about Rowdy Fox, it does some incredible things, which I'll explain, but again, trying to get an agent to understand how it works is my point, right? So, for example, people think, I'll do some stuff and I'll go and engage an external social media company, right?
Yeah.
Problem is that social media company is often working outside of
the
whatever ecosystem that you're working in, and so therefore it's the same problem, right? So someone engages with your material, well, you can't actually connect it back to any of all those other data points that you just mentioned as an example, because it's not connected. So the thing I love about Rowdy Fox is they come into your environment and then they fully connect all the way through the system. And let me give you an example. So I think that, and it's just about audience. So people don't realize what happens is you don't spend this money, and you're basically buying placement on social via Meta to understand who your target customer is. Once all those data points queue up and say, okay, this is your likely next customer, you buy a placement on Insta or on Facebook or whatever. And what happens is it's just sitting there waiting for that customer to engage in their newsfeed in some way, shape, or form. And then it's basically placing your profile or whatever it is that you want, whatever content you want in front of that consumer, right?
Just sold stuff.
And that's a really highly valuable investment because it's quite a low cost per placement, actually.
But it's a very targeted audience.
And it's super targeted, right? So it's getting you right in front of the people that are showing all of these indicators, and it's then putting your content in front of them. Now, as and when people are engaging with that content, they become your audience and they become a retargetable audience, right? Now, as you build over a number of months, let's say you do 3 months of this, right? And you build this audience out and all of a sudden you got like 6,000 or 7,000 people in there that's a retargetable audience. Depending upon what else you're doing in your cycle, you can keep adding to that audience. So we sell other products that are social products that also help build that audience out. If people are then connecting with your newsletters, that gets added to the audience. And all of a sudden your audience is building out, but then you've got people that are actually doing stuff inside that environment. Now, what people don't know is if they stop doing it after, it hasn't worked. Well, because they don't realize that
it takes time.
Well, it's not just that. What actually happens is all that information ends up going back into an environment that says, now I'm going to produce you a call list.
And now you got to call them.
And it turns up on your call list. It doesn't turn up as someone ringing you.
Yes.
It turns up because that person's doing all these
showing
things in the environment. And then it turns up on your call list, and then you make the calls and you pick up a listing, right? But you didn't actually connect the dots that came out of your audience. So then what I'm finding agents are doing are going, well, it's not working. So I'm going to stop. But the minute you do that, unfortunately, you lose all of the audience. So you go back to square one. So this is what I mean by agent understanding. So there's a heap of science that goes into this digital, if you really want to get this data play, but unless you understand it and commit to it and understand it's an always-on strategy, then you're also not going to be maximizing your effectiveness.
And I think like in the very early days, even back to our Headstrong recordings, you would talk about how do you build data? How do you then go to nurture that data once you've got it? And then what do you do to the point of conversion? And we're now in an environment where do you actually understand? If you wrote up in front of your sales team, property managers, and said on BDMs, how do we actually build data? Taking names that open for inspections as an example, doing justice calls around a listing, whatever the story is. Once I've got that data, then what do we do to nurture it? And this is actually now in the digital environment that if you've got the right systems built in and you've got the right suppliers connecting into that ecosystem, you can actually build out incredible digital journeys that are going to give you better quality digital intent to then move to the moment of conversion that you've still got to get on the phone and actually do the calls. But the actual penetration rate and the success rate of those calls is substantially higher if you really know what you're doing. And that's the big difference. It's like the firms of the future are going to be very, very clear about the value of that data. And I think, Dean, this could even go into the valuation of real estate firms later on about the quality of that data and the ability to be able to produce consistent leads that actually really convert.